Hi, Percy here. Ladies form an orderly queue. Men, as you are probably aware, unbiased news from the mainstream media is about as non-existent as a straight answer from Jordan Peterson to the question, do you believe in God? That's right, we're doing mainstream media today, the MSM, not to be confused with S&M, because I made that mistake before and I've still got the chafing. Yeah, I know, that makes no sense. I've got nothing. Here's some loud guitars. Now then, today we'll be looking at The Independent and what a blatant propaganda machine it is. Some of you have probably seen the recent article circulating from The Independent titled, How the Teachings of Islam Could Help Us Prevent More Sexual Abuse Scandals. And if you did read that, it probably made you laugh hysterically for at least 5 minutes before the realization, the horror, dawned on you of the implications that such an article could be published by a seemingly credible mainstream news outlet. Once upon a time, The Independent used to have a reputation for being somewhat credible. For the most part left-leaning, sure, but generally held in relatively high regard. I mean, the very word independent implies impartiality and self-control, free of external pressures. But the reality couldn't be further from the truth. And this article provides a good example of The Independent pushing a narrative that serves its investors. Because a sultan from Saudi Arabia, with no other business interests in the UK, just recently bought an enormous 30% shareholding. It's not the first time that the integrity of The Independent has been compromised by the acquisition of shares by a foreign investor. Someone whose father was a high-ranking KGB agent, Eugenie Lebedev, owns The Independent's parent company, ESI Media. And the Russian investor's shareholding of The Independent currently stands at 41%, according to The Guardian. The Guardian itself, now a left-wing mouthpiece propaganda-pushing joke of a news outlet, but we'll look at them on another occasion when we have time. This isn't a tinfoil hat conspiracy theory. It's all information that's publicly available. Anyone who hears this information and thinks to themselves, I don't know what you're getting at. I'm sure it's perfectly innocent and doesn't affect the news coverage in any way. Anyone who thinks that is as gullible as a doggy that thinks you really did throw the ball after the 20th fake throw in a row. So gullible. But they're lovely, aren't they?
Hi, doggy.
Lovable and gullible in equal measure. The Guardian goes on to say, in a move that highlights the concerns about the deal, Abul Jadayel, fuck your stupid name, fuck your name in the face, Abul Jadayel, got it, is understood to have had to sign a declaration that his investment is personal and that he is the ultimate beneficial owner of The Independent shares. Well, so what? Is that supposed to reassure the public? It appears to address the financial aspect of the investment, letting us know that the money isn't coming directly from the Saudi government, for example. But it doesn't address how the ideological leanings of the investor will affect their editorial decisions. The odds seem very high to me of this just being an offering of plausible deniability, aimed at cushioning the blow of the news as a preemptive attempt to restore people's confidence in the face of very clear evidence that The Independent can no longer be trusted as a news outlet. Somebody probably wiser than me once said, discuss ideas, not people, but someone wiser than them also said, the only golden rule is that there are no golden rules. George Bernard Shaw, the second one, and that golden rule, the golden rule about there being no golden rules, that rule is my golden rule. But the whole point of the video I'm making here is to look at the motivation behind and the trustworthiness of the source material. So let's do that. What about the person actually writing this article? Are their motivations pure? Or are they perhaps useful pawns selected because of the narrative they push? They may wholeheartedly believe everything they say, but still be compromised by certain allegiances, be it subconsciously or otherwise. Or they might just be right, and we should accept them at their word, with each claim justified and objectively accurate. I don't think it's the last one, but we'll see. Who knows? Let's prepare to be surprised, shall we? When a Muslim is making empirical claims about the teachings of Islam, then those are claims which can be investigated. We can look at the reference texts themselves and whether they are presented in the most plausibly accurate context. And we can look at statistics to see what percentage of Muslims would agree with the interpretations and teachings represented in the article. When I first saw the name Qasim Rashid, it sounded very familiar. And when I saw his Twitter handle at the bottom of the article, I instantly remembered who it was. He goes by the name of Muslim IQ, and he is very active on Twitter. Let's have a little look-see at his profile. Become a #Muslim ally. No thanks, I'm good. At trueislam.com. Oh, they might as well have called that notruescotsman.com. So as you can see, this guy is the regressive left's wet dream. He describes himself as an American Muslim, an Islamic educator, women's rights defender, and a Black Lives Matter supporter. And at the end there, he's lovably added, "Dad joke extraordinaire." Just to let you know, if he hadn't made it abundantly clear by the previous virtue signalling, that he's your garden variety, friendly neighborhood Muslim. He's your family-friendly Muslim. Family-friendly Muslim. Family-friendly Muslim. Muhammad too much. Family-friendly Muslim. Family-friendly Muslim. Family-friendly Muslim. Muhammad too much. Thank you, PewDiePie. That was very nice. Very nice. So that's how he's presenting himself. And it's made him a magnet for the left-wing MSM, who are constantly ramming Islam down our throats as a force for good in the world. Like it isn't triggering a natural gag reflex to any sane person with a head on their shoulders every time they do it.
That's the bit.
But how are his views in reality? Do they line up with mainstream liberal thought in a nice digestible palette of tastes? Or is there a dark underbelly of putrid Islamic dogma-inspired apologetics hiding in the subtext of his narrative? Well, Qasim Rashid is one of those progressive feminist Muslims. Such an oxymoron. He must be so conflicted. Or not, actually. I keep forgetting that mainstream feminism and Islam align quite nicely these days, don't they?
You are an Islamist and you are a feminist. We have so very much in common.
At least certain aspects of feminism, such as the prudish, sex-negative variety, the women should cover up variety, the we hate white men faction, the hijab is a symbol of empowerment faction of the feminist movement. Yes, he aligns with those feminists very well indeed. But as we know, feminism and women's rights are two entirely different things. And to claim to be a supporter of women's rights and a Muslim in the West makes you a walking contradiction. Constantly having to do all the somersaults and contortions necessary to justify archaically misogynistic Islamic doctrine. And a quick glance at his recent tweets shows that although he's liberal enough to join in condemning Saudi Arabia and Pakistan for their barbarous penal system, he does use identity politics to race bait and talk about white privilege and white terrorists, as though whiteness is an ideology that needs to be defeated. And you see, this is the problem with even supposedly liberal Muslims like himself. They still refuse to accept that the scriptures can be in any way flawed, that Muhammad ever did anything wrong at all in his whole life, let alone being a murderous, misogynistic barbarian, as is abundantly clear to the unindoctrinated. If other Muslims or Muslim communities, Sharia-compliant societies, do things or condone behaviours or punishments which he disagrees with, well then he'd claim that that's because they're misreading the Quran, that they're doing it wrong, that that's not true Islam, or that they're hijacking the religion, perverting infallible scripture for their own selfish reasons. We've heard it all before. Well, who is more representative of Islam? Who more closely follows the teachings and practices of the self-proclaimed Prophet Muhammad? More to the point, which is the mainstream form of Islam, approved of by the majority of Muslims around the world today, be it in the liberal West or other places such as the Middle East, Africa, Indonesia, Chechnya, wherever. Well, Qasim Rashid is an Ahmadi Muslim. Ahmadi Muslims represent just percent of the world's Muslims, and are considered to be complete and utter heretics to the vast majority of Muslims the world over, to the extent that some nations refuse to even recognize them as Muslim. They see them as non-Muslim kuffar or kafir, no better than us big dog atheists, Christians, apostates and other such infidels. I'm not even exaggerating. They are neither Sunni nor Shia. They're their own funny, weird little cultish sect that everybody else thinks are fucking nuts. Don't take my word for it. Have it from the horse's mouth. Here's Qasim Rashid himself, tweeting just the other day about 3 Ahmadiyya Muslims accused of blasphemy being sentenced to death by hanging. It is a punishable offence in Pakistan for an Ahmadiyyan to call themselves Muslim. Look, it's literally written into their constitution. Quote, an Ahmadi calling himself Muslim or preaching or propagating his faith or outraging the religious feelings of Muslims or posing himself as a Muslim. So as you can see, Ahmadis are called out specifically there, and by the loose language of some of those other penal codes, you can see a variety of blasphemy penalties that they could suffer if the authorities decided to throw the book at them, just for being Ahmadi, which is essentially how those 3 got the death penalty this week. Even in the UK, a place considered to be the most welcoming to Ahmadiyyans, they are still constantly persecuted by the wider Muslim community for their heretic beliefs and regarded by most as either not true Muslims or straight up non-Muslims.
Because they are misleading other Muslims.
But do you think by putting a poster up, are you encouraging people to hate this group?
No, we just need to give information to people that they are not Muslims.
Mr. Rabbani told us the poster wasn't encouraging hate, but simply warning people to stay away from Ahmadis because they're not true Muslims.
The murder of Assad Shah is just the most recent example of sectarian extremism targeting the Ahmadiyya Muslim community in the UK. This includes reports of Ahmadiyya being refused employment, of businesses being boycotted, of school children being bullied and shunned, and people like Amr Anwar, who've worked to bring faith leaders together, have faced death threats.
So why are Ahmadiyyan Muslims like Qasim Rashid so reviled by the rest of the Muslim community? We need look no further than a single tweet from him to see why. This is a tweet by Qasim Rashid from just a few days ago, and it actually tells us rather a lot. The tweet starts, "This is hashtag why I write." So he's telling us that this tweet encapsulates the essence of what motivates him, what drives him. Then he writes, quote, "The jihad of the pen is infinitely greater than the jihad of the sword." So right away, from the outset, he's going to alienate a lot of Muslims with that statement. Many sects of Islam declare that there is no greater honour for a Muslim, nor speedier path to heaven than to die while committing an act of violent jihad against the infidels. Certainly the more extreme groups like the Taliban, who would rather turn children into soldiers than scholars, Al-Qaeda, ISIS, or especially Boko Haram, whose very name means Western education is forbidden. But they're the very extreme groups in Islam, and others like them. We want him to say things that they would disagree with. So that's great. And there are also Islamists who don't fall into any of those groups, just regular Sunni or Shia Muslims at the more conservative end of the spectrum, who, although lead peaceful lives themselves, still agree with the sentiment of violent jihad in principle and support those that do it.
I was raised in Saudi Arabia. This is danger. I saw the beheading. My eyes when I was young. I saw the beheading. They forced me to wear the hijab.
وأذل الشرك والمشركين اللهم انصر عبادك الموحدين اللهم انصرهم على القوم المجرمين.
They forced me to hate the Christian, anti-Semitism. I hate the Jews. I am Palestinian. They teach me I have to kill the Jewish people. I have to kill the Christian.
هم أحدا اللهم طهر المسجد الأقصى من دنس اليهود اللهم طهر المسجد الأقصى من دنس اليهود.
This is Canadian. This is quotes from Canadians, imams. Every mosque in Canada, they teach jihad, they teach killing for the kids. And the school board, they want to bring it to the kids.
اللهم عليك بمن شرد أبناء المسلمين اللهم أحصهم عددا اللهم قتلهم بددا ولا تغادر منهم.
They teach me I have to kill the Jewish people, I have to kill the Christian, we have to do jihad, we have to go for war. That's Islam, this is Islam.
But I'm willing to accept that he's still in line with the majority of Muslims in the West at this point with what he's written. The next part of the tweet is a quote, and this is the bit that even your Muslim neighbour, or lovable Muslim co-worker, or the average Muslim about town, even they will have a serious problem with. Because the quote isn't by the self-proclaimed Prophet Muhammad, for example, or a respected scholar of Islam. No, Reza, I said respected. And scholar. Get the fuck out of here. This quote isn't by, say, an Ayatollah or a quote from the Quran or any hadith. This quote is from who? Mirza Ghulam Ahmad, a man who claimed to be the Messiah. The Jesus of Islam, in other words. More important than Mohammed. Ahmadiyans are to Islam what Mormons are to Christianity. Or even more like what Christians are to Jews. They're the kooky sect. The bastard, illegitimate, evolutionary, mimetic offshoot of the proper Islam. It's all the old stuff with a new guy tacked on at the end. A new Jesus from about 100 years ago. Yes, this guy is more recent than Joseph Smith, the Mormon prophet. We already had cars when he was alive. That's how far from mainstream Islam this guy is.
A lot of non-Ahmadi Muslims assume that Ahmadiyya was created by the British spies, the British government, or the Israeli government.
The non-Ahmadis believe that apparently Ahmadis could be secretly Jewish agents.
The Hajj is the fifth pillar of Islam that all Muslims are required to make. However, if they know you're an Ahmadi Muslim, though, you're not allowed to make the Hajj.
Did you hear that? Ahmadi Muslims are so heretical to mainstream Islam that they are not allowed, not permitted to even make the journey to Mecca that all Muslims are supposed to make once in their lifetime. So if Ahmadi Muslims want to visit Mecca like all the other Muslims in the world, they literally have to conceal their identity and pretend that they are not Ahmadis. But most just don't go. It's too dangerous. That's how blasphemous their sect of Islam is to all the other Muslims in the world. The foreign minister of Pakistan got into really hot water and had to publicly apologise for being seen in a photograph with an Ahmadiyyan. He had to promise that in future he would always check the identity of people in a picture with him in case one of them ever happened to be an Ahmadiyyan. Because that is so shameful, to be seen standing next to one in a photograph. Oh my goodness! And that's how reviled they are. So, having now clarified that the writer of this article, Qasim Rashid, does not represent anything that comes close to being what can be called, quote, true Islam, as he claims, that 97% of the world's Muslims see his teachings as not only a bit different, but completely blasphemous. Having clarified that, we can pretty much dismiss anything he says in the Independent article as an untrustworthy example of the, quote, teachings of Islam, as the title boldly claims. Boldly? Boldly. It's a weird word, isn't it? Boldly. Am I doing it right? I don't remember William Shatner ever having this much trouble. It must be me. Note to self, avoid using sentences that include the word boldly. There, got it. So anyway, basically in the article, we nonetheless get the standard Westerner-friendly Islamic apologia. The usual selective referencing of cherry-picked nice-sounding verses, and the ignoring of the not so nice sounding ones. In fact, it's actually worse than that, because the Ahmadiyyan Quran is completely different to everybody else's. I mean that when he cites a verse from the Ahmadiyyan Quran, it doesn't line up with the world's most commonly referenced online version, Quran.com. Or even with my own paperback copy at home, the highly reputable Oxford translation of the Quran. Muslims will tell you, till they're blue in the face, that there's only one version of the Quran, that there are no variations. Well, the Ahmadiyyans found their own variation. It just doesn't match. So when he cites, for example, verses 4.2 and 4.20 of his version of the Quran in this article in The Independent, anyone else looking up those verses in a regular copy of the Quran will get something completely different. Not a slightly different translation, but a completely different verse altogether. But it doesn't matter, because there's nothing more tiresome and time-wasting than getting bogged down in scripture, checking references against what a theocrat says the true meaning is. They take a good verse, you take a bad verse. They say, "You're out of context." You say, "No, you are." And before long, you've disappeared down a rabbit hole of pointless scriptural debate, arguing over who has the correct interpretation, which is exactly what they want. It's all nonsense. You shouldn't need a centuries-old book to tell you, for example, whether or not it's acceptable to rape children or beat your wife. Or, to stay on topic, to corner a frightened young actress in your hotel room and force her to watch you beat off into a plant pot. Aside from anything else, isn't that too salty for the plant? It's going to dry out. He's a good producer though, isn't he? Harvey Weinstein. He's done some good movies. No, I'm not allowed to say that, am I? Oh, it's a shame. He's completely fucked it for himself, hasn't he? His name will just get used as a shameful verb in future, won't it? That'll be his legacy. In fact, I wonder if the Urban Dictionary... Yep! There it is! It's already in there! Of course! Oh, brilliant. Back to the topic. Actually, I think I've pretty much covered everything, haven't I? I've shown why the article isn't written by someone who can be considered a reliable source regarding Islamic teachings. I mean, I could point out that the self-proclaimed Prophet Muhammad, who is considered to be the perfect role model in Islam, beat his wife Aisha on her chest. Even though she was a good, obedient little wife growing up. Becoming quite skilled at cleaning the jizz stains off his clothes, according to the Hadith. Actually, Muhammad's sexual restraint is the stuff of legend, as a committee of Saudi Arabian higher scholars attested in Fatwa number 41409 that Muhammad had full control of its penis, allowing him to thigh-fuck 6-year-old Aisha while showing the strength of will to not penetrate her vagina. Yes, they were actually saying that so perfect a human was Muhammad, so strong was his willpower and restraint, that he was even capable of rubbing his penis between a 6-year-old's thighs to completion without losing control and sticking it in. Wow, what a great guy Muhammad was! It's no wonder his clothes were encrusted in jism. Seriously, that's an actual thing, thigh fucking. Look it up. It's called mufakathat. I know it sounds like parody. Like a play on the words mifakathat. Mifakathat. But it's real. Mufakathat. It's real. I know it sounds ridiculous. Yeah, look it up. That's the Islamic name for thigh fucking. A concept which Muslims in the Middle East debate over.
يعني التمتع بالمفاخذة شنو ذي؟ التمتع بالرضيعة معناته ذي. زين الرضيعة يعني كم عمرها؟ سنة ونص أشهر. يعني هل يعقل رجل بالغ يمارس الجنس مع طفلة رضيعة وتقولون لي الشريعة الإسلامية أحلت هذه الأمور؟ خل المتعة.
Need I say, if Islam can't even be clear on something like this, all the more reason not to let this foul religion drag us down with it. I don't care how moderate and watered down the Ahmadiyyan % of its practitioners are, because they're enabling the others, the hardline sunny theocrats waiting in the wings to push Sharia forward at any given opportunity, ratcheting their way into the driving seat of Islamic social and political discourse. But where does this leave the Independent? If it is now 30% Saudi-owned, wouldn't they be pushing a more hardline Wahhabi version of Islam? and not a heretic Ahmadi Muslim like Qasim Rashid? I wouldn't be doing my due diligence if I didn't address this question. And the answer is very clear. The Independent is aimed at liberal Westerners.
Diversity is a source of strength.
The vast majority of whom are non-Muslim. That's its target audience. So it would be impossible to suddenly start pushing a really overtly more conservative version of Islam there. It would backfire completely. So what we're getting from Saudi Arabia is a kind of two-pronged attack. Vast numbers of Saudi Arabian-funded mosques around Europe and across the world have been springing up everywhere, and the more conservative hardline Wahhabi-type Muslims have been spreading like Islam. So behind the scenes, among the Muslim community, they're pushing the stricter, less tolerant form of Islam, but in the media, they're softening the liberal West up with an image of a non-threatening, more relaxed Islam to get them on side and allow the spread of the religion to flow more freely, like a flock of wolves in sheep's clothing. And the fact is that even this softer Islam is still the same old Islam underneath. Qasim Rashid isn't even that moderate. He's defended sex segregation, encouraged wearing of the hijab for women, and gushes over his caliph, who's made it very clear what he thinks the role of women should be in life. So a useful idiot like Qasim Rashid still fits the Saudi game plan, so to speak. Now I know this all sounds a bit conspiratorial for a skeptic like me. So to be clear, it isn't necessarily a deliberate collaborative effort by the Saudi regime to spread Islam throughout the world, using covert methods from behind closed doors. It may well be happening more organically than that. Rich Saudis really believe, as their religion tells them, that their one true faith will eventually fill the planet, and that it's their duty to help things along the way as best they can. So they'll gladly donate money, be it the Saudi government or wealthy individuals, to have dozens of mosques built in their name, and that ownership then leads to a controlling say in the imams who preach there, and the promotional material and flyers that come with it. The purchasing of media outlets may come from a similar place of what they see as Muslim goodwill, a desire to simply portray a positive view of Muslims to the West. In fact, Qasim Rashid has already written a string of articles similar for The Independent, and it could have been that newspaper's history of naive fondness for Islam, their Islamophilia, to coin Douglas Murray's term, that attracted the Saudi Sultan to buy a 30% shareholding in the first place. Either way, as far as I'm concerned, The Independent has lost all credibility as a trustworthy news source. Well, you made it to the end, and for that, I thank you. Please like, share, subscribe, put pictures of me all over your naked bunny and run through the marketplace. I've been Perskeptive, and you've been, hunched over a speeding fist? I don't know what you've been doing, but whatever it is, you're welcome to join next time and do it again, when the blisters have healed. Take it easy.